The 1973 lesson: why Modi didn't repeat Indira Gandhi's West Asia gamble. What if I told you that India once backed an entire bloc of nations during a major Middle East war only to get hit with one of the worst economic shocks in the history? And what if I told you that more than 50 years later, another West Asian conflict threatened India's energy security, but this time New Delhi played a completely different game? Did Narendra Modi learn a lesson from Indira Gandhi's biggest foreign policy miscalculation? Or is the comparison more complicated than it appears? Tonight, on the news analysis, we examine how two prime ministers faced similar crises in West Asia, yet choose radically different paths. So, I am Amit, your host, and you are watching DNN Voice of Nation. Welcome to our special program, The News Analysis. The guns may have fallen silent after the recent US-Iran ceasefire, but the brief conflict once again reminded the world of critical reality. A war in West Asia doesn't stay in West Asia, especially when it threatens the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which nearly one-fifth of world's oil passes every day. When tensions escalate between Israel, Iran, and eventually the United States, global markets immediately reacted. Oil traders feared supply disruptions, energy importing nations prepared for the worst. And for India, a country that imports the majority of its crude oil, the danger was obvious. Could another oil shock be around the corner? That question brought back memories of an crisis that changed India's economic history forever. The year was 1973 and the Prime Minister was Indira Gandhi. The gamble of 1973 October, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. The conflict became known as Yom Kippur War, but it was never just a regional war. The United States strongly supported Israel. The Soviet Union backed Arab states. As soon oil became a weapon, at that time India was becoming increasingly dependent on imported crude. The Gulf region was critical to India's energy needs. Large number of Indians were also working across Arab countries. Faced with realities, Indira Gandhi government made its choice. India openly sided with Arab bloc. New Delhi blamed Israel for the conflict. The government adopted one of the strongest pro-Arab positions among non-allied countries, and the support did not stop when the war ended. India later supported Palestinian diplomatic initiative at United Nations. It granted official recognition to Palestine Liberation Organization. It hosted a PLO office in New Delhi and repeatedly aligned itself with Arab causes on international stage. The expectation was straightforward. If India stood firmly with Arab nations, Arab oil producers would remember that support during the difficult times. It seemed logical. But international politics rarely rewards sentiments. The shock that followed. Then came the surprise. OPEC nations dramatically increased oil prices. Crude oil prices jumped from roughly $3 per barrel to nearly $12. An increase of almost 300%. India hoped its diplomatic support would earn some special treatment, perhaps lower prices, perhaps preferential supply arrangements, perhaps some exemption. None came. Arab oil producers did not create a special category for India. Despite all political backings New Delhi had offered, India paid the same sharp increased prices as everyone else. The consequences were devastating. India's oil import bill exploded. Foreign exchange reserves came under enormous pressure, inflation surged, economic growth suffered, and policy makers learned a painful lesson. Countries may appreciate diplomatic support, but when vital nations' interests are at the stake, they act primarily in their own self-interest. For money analysis, 1973 became a textbook example of realism in international relations. Goodwill alone cannot guarantee economic security. Now, fast forward to 2026. Now, let us move ahead more than 5 decades. Another conflict, another crisis, another threat to oil supplies. This time, tensions between Israel and Iran raised fears that Strait of Hormuz could become a battleground. For India, the risks were enormous. Prolonged disruption could have driven up fuel prices, increased inflation, damaged economic growth, and affected millions of consumers. But unlike 1973, India entered this crisis for a much stronger position and perhaps more importantly, with a complete different strategy. Instead of publicly choosing sides, New Delhi focused on one message: peace, dialogue, de-escalation, and regional stability. The government maintained communication with multiple players across West Asia: Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and other regional partners. Rather than betting on one camp, India sought to preserve relations with all of them. Supporters describe this approach as strategic autonomy or simply India first. Preparation before the crisis. The biggest difference between 1973 and 2026 may not be diplomacy, it may be the preparation. Over last decades, India steadily reduced its dependence on the single source of oil. The country diversified crude oil imports across dozens of supplies. Today, India sources oil from around 40 countries. That flexibility matters. If one region faces disruption, alternatives can be activated. At the same time, India expanded strategic petroleum reserves. These reserves functions like a national emergency stockpile. Think of them as insurance against sudden supply shocks. The idea is simple. If global supplies are disrupted, India can continue operating while markets stabilize. During the recent crisis, India refineries continue function normally. There was no major fuel shortage, no panic buying, no significant disruption in petrol, diesel, LPG, or aviation fuel supplies. And that stability was not accidental. It was the result of years of planning. Supporters of Modi government argue that this is precisely the lesson policymakers learned from painful experience of 1973. Never assume diplomatic friendships will protect you. Prepare for the worst before it comes. Now, the two leaders, two philosophies. At its core, this debate is not really about oil. It is about foreign policy philosophy. Indira Gandhi's approach reflected a world where political alignments and ideological solidarity often shaped diplomatic decisions. Modi's approach reflects more multipolar world. A world where countries increasingly pursue issue-based partnerships, where strategic flexibility matters, where national interests often outweighs ideological alignment. Supporters of Modi argue that India's response to Israel-Iran crisis demonstrates the success of this approach. Critics, however, would argue that historical situations are never identical and comparison can sometimes oversimplify complex realities. And that is important point. History rarely repeats itself exactly, but it often offers lessons. The question is whether leaders learn from them. So, did Narendra Modi avoid repeating Indira Gandhi's West Asia gamble? Supporters would say yes. They argue that while the Indira Gandhi relied on diplomatic loyalty and received an oil stock in return, Modi focused on diversification, strategic reserves, and national preparedness. Critics may disagree with the parts of that assessment, but one fact remains undeniable. The world of energy security has changed dramatically. And for a country as dependent on imported oil as India, preparations may matter more than political alignment. Because when global crises erupt, nations are ultimately judged not only by friends they choose, but by how effectively they protect their own interests. I am Amit, your host, and this was the news analysis. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to DNN Voice of Nation, that is our own YouTube news channel, and tell us in comments, did Modi learn the lessons of 1973, or is this comparison unfair to Indira Gandhi? Thanks for watching. See you in the next video of the news analysis on DNN Voice of Nation. Till then, this is your host Amit saying goodbye to all of you, and Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.